what if the people who smile at you the widest are the ones quietly working against you? Most people believe jealousy is loud. They picture slammed doors, screamed accusations, dramatic betrayals you can see coming from a mile away. The disturbing truth is far quieter than that. Real jealousy rarely announces itself. It disguises itself as concern, as humor, as helpfulness, as friendship. Few people realize that some of the closest figures in their life, a coworker, a sibling, even a friend they have known for years, may be running a silent campaign against them. Not with fists, not with threats, with small comments, quiet omissions, subtle jokes that land just a little too sharp to be accidental. Nietzsche understood this better than almost anyone alive today. He spent years studying what he called resentment, a quiet poison that festers in people who feel inferior, who cannot create or build at the level they secretly crave. And so instead, they learn to tear down what others have built. Marcus Aurelius warned something similar from the throne of an empire. The people who undermine you rarely do it with malice they could name out loud, even to themselves. They do it because their own unspoken suffering demands company. In this video, we expose the 8 silent ways jealous people sabotage you without you ever noticing. Once you see these patterns, you will never be blind to them again. It starts with praise. And that is exactly what makes it so dangerous. You got the promotion? Wow, I guess they really needed someone. You lost so much weight. Did you get work done? Your business is doing well. Must be nice not having real responsibilities yet. Most people brush these comments off as clumsy phrasing, bluntness, or even a strange form of honesty. They tell themselves the person didn't mean anything by it. But the truth is sharper than that. A backhanded compliment is not an accident. It is a compromise. The jealous mind cannot fully ignore your success. That would be too obvious, too revealing. But it also cannot fully celebrate your success, because that would mean admitting, even silently, that you have moved ahead. So it splits the difference. It hands you a compliment with a blade folded inside it, just sharp enough to remind you that your win is being watched, measured, and quietly resented. Think about the friend who finally lands the relationship she always wanted, only to be told, "I'm surprised he likes someone like you." Think about the sibling who buys his first house and hears, "Must be nice having parents who helped you, even when no help was given." Think about the coworker who closes a major deal and is met with, "The client was probably desperate anyway." Schopenhauer wrote that envy is one of the few vices people are most ashamed to admit, which is exactly why it never appears naked. It always wears a disguise, and praise is one of its favorite costumes. Here is the insight to remember. A backhanded compliment is the sound of someone trying to make peace with your success while their ego refuses to fully surrender to it. This one is quieter than the first and far more common than people think. You find out about the dinner after it happened. You see the photos from the trip you were never invited on. You learn, almost by accident, that a decision was made about something that affects you, and you were never in the room. Most people explain this away as an oversight. They probably just forgot. It wasn't intentional. Sometimes that is true. But when it becomes a pattern, especially around moments where you might shine, succeed, or simply be celebrated, it stops being an accident and becomes a message. The hidden psychology here is about control over visibility. If someone cannot compete with your presence, the next best strategy is to remove your presence entirely. Exclusion is rarely about logistics. It is about leverage, keeping the spaces where status is built and admiration is given as places where you simply do not exist. Watch for the friend group that quietly stops including you once your life starts improving. Watch for the family gathering where everyone's achievements are toasted, except yours. Your name skipped over like static on the radio. Watch for the work meeting you were somehow never looped into. The one meeting that would have let you shine in front of the right people. Carl Jung spent his life studying what he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, which then get expressed indirectly, through behavior rather than words. People who cannot own their envy almost never say, "I am jealous of you." Instead, their shadow speaks through silent acts. A missing invitation, a forgotten mention, a door quietly closed. The Stoics would remind you that the slight itself is outside your control, but your peace is not. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire while absorbing far worse than a missed dinner invite, and he never let it determine his inner state. Remember this: exclusion is rarely about you not being good enough to include. It is about you being too much to risk including. Are you sure you can handle that? I just don't want to see you get hurt. Maybe you should think it through a little more before you quit your job. On the surface, this sounds like love. It sounds like someone protecting you from a mistake, and sometimes it genuinely is. But there is a darker version of this sentence, one that comes from a very different place. And learning to tell the two apart may be one of the most valuable skills you ever develop. Real concern wants your growth, even when growth is risky. Jealous discouragement wants your stillness, dressed up as caution. The difference is subtle on the surface and enormous underneath. Here is why. Your ambition is a mirror. When you decide to grow, to move to a new city, to start a business, to leave a relationship that no longer serves you, you are unintentionally reflecting back to certain people everything they have not done with their own life. Your motion makes their stagnation visible, even if no one says a word about it. So instead of confronting their own fear, they redirect it onto you in the gentle language of worry. The parent who discourages a child from leaving their hometown, insisting it's for their own good. The friend who warns you against starting a business with a long list of reasons it will fail, despite having never tried anything risky themselves. The partner who subtly undercuts your ambitions with phrases like, "You've already got a good life. Why complicate it?" Nietzsche wrote extensively about what he called the herd, the collective instinct to punish anyone who tries to rise above the average, because the rise of one person exposes the choice of everyone else to remain where they are. Marcus Aurelius, by contrast, trained himself daily to expect resistance from others and to never let their fear become his ceiling. The insight to carry with you: real love expands your horizon. Jealousy shrinks it and calls it wisdom. This is one of the oldest sabotage tactics in human history, and one of the hardest to detect because it almost never happens in front of you. It sounds like this: a coworker quietly suggesting to your boss that your recent win was mostly luck. A friend telling your mutual circle that you've changed since things started going well for you. A family member subtly rewriting the story of your success to relatives, making sure your effort gets erased and replaced with circumstance. Most people dismiss gossip as harmless talk, the background noise of social life. But gossip used this way is not harmless. It is strategic. It is a campaign to lower your social value in rooms you are not present to defend yourself in. The deeper motivation is almost always insecurity in search of allies. A single jealous person attacking you alone feels exposed, even shameful, even to themselves. But jealousy distributed among a group feels like consensus. It feels safer. It feels almost righteous. So the jealous mind recruits, one conversation at a time, building a quiet coalition that can validate the resentment it cannot admit to feeling alone. Jung's concept of projection is essential here. The things people accuse you of behind your back are very often the exact things they fear or despise in themselves. Ambition they were too afraid to pursue, confidence they never built, success they secretly crave. Schopenhauer put it simply: envy never rests, because it requires the constant comparison of your life against someone else's to justify its own existence. Here is the truth that should give you strength rather than fear. People do not spend energy attacking those they feel safe around. The very fact that someone is talking about you, strategizing around you, recruiting opinions about you, is proof of how much real estate you occupy in their mind. You are not as small to them as they pretend you are. This sabotage tactic is almost invisible because it is built entirely out of absence. Nothing happens. And that is exactly the point. A coworker who forgets to forward a job lead that would have benefited you. A friend who hears about an opportunity perfect for your goals and mentions it only after the deadline has passed. A mentor figure who gives advice freely, but somehow always leaves out the one detail that would have actually made the difference. Most people interpret this as forgetfulness or simple busyness. Sometimes it is. But when the pattern repeats specifically around moments that would help you rise, it reveals something far more calculated, a quiet form of gatekeeping. The motivation underneath this behavior is a scarcity mindset, the deep and often unconscious belief that there is only so much success, recognition, or opportunity available, and that anything given to you is something taken from them. In that worldview, your gain is automatically experienced as their loss, even when logically it isn't true at all. The Stoics, particularly Epictetus, taught the dichotomy of control. You cannot control what others choose to withhold from you, but you can control how independent you build yourself to be. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power adds another layer here. Those who feel powerless in their own lives often try to regain a sense of power by restricting what others can access. Since they cannot expand their own position, they settle for limiting someone else's. The insight worth remembering. What someone deliberately withholds from you tells you exactly what they fear you might become if you had it. You share something you're proud of, and within seconds, the conversation has quietly shifted to someone else's bigger, better, more impressive version of it. That's nothing. My cousin did way more than that. Yeah, but you should hear what happened to me. You mention a personal goal you finally reached, and the response comes laced with a "yeah, but" that deflates the moment before it can even breathe. Most people interpret this as simple conversational habit, the way some people relate to stories by matching them with their own. But there is a meaningful difference between relating to your joy and quietly competing with it. One adds to the moment, the other steals from it. The hidden mechanism here is about internal hierarchy. The jealous mind keeps a constant, often unconscious scoreboard of where it stands relative to others. Hearing about your win, even for a few seconds, places you above them on that invisible scoreboard. And the ego cannot tolerate sitting beneath someone else, even momentarily, even in conversation. So it scrambles to restore balance through comparison, minimizing your achievement just enough to reclaim its position. This shows up at the dinner table when your good news is instantly one-upped by someone else's bigger story. It shows up online when you post something you're proud of and someone responds, not with celebration, but with a competing post of their own days later. Somehow bigger, somehow better timed. It shows up in friendships where your milestones are quietly treated as challenges rather than celebrations. Social comparison theory, a well-documented concept in modern psychology, explains exactly why this happens. Human beings evaluate their own worth largely by comparing themselves to others, and the closer that other person is to them in identity or circumstance, the more threatening the comparison feels. Nietzsche described something similar in his portrait of what he called the last man, a person who cannot tolerate the sight of greatness in others, because it forces an uncomfortable confrontation with his own mediocrity. The truth worth holding on to, Those who cannot sit, even briefly, in admiration of you are at war with their own reflection, not with you. This sabotage tactic is strange because on the surface it looks like the opposite of jealousy. Looks like flattery. A coworker takes your idea into a meeting and presents it as their own. A friend starts the exact business you've been quietly building toward just months after you mentioned it, and somehow frames it as something they always wanted to do. A sibling mirrors your major life decisions. The same career shift, the same kind of relationship, even the same city, while insisting it was entirely their own path, unrelated to yours. Most people read this as coincidence, inspiration, or simply two people wanting similar things. Sometimes that's exactly what it is. But when imitation is consistently followed by an unspoken or spoken claim of superiority, it reveals something more complicated underneath. This pattern is fueled by a kind of identity borrowing. The jealous mind, lacking the confidence to generate something original of its own, quietly studies what works for you and adopts it, but cannot tolerate giving you credit for it, because credit would mean admitting it followed rather than led. So it copies, then claims ownership, sometimes even convincing itself in the process. Jung's work on archetypes describes the shadow as the part of the self that seeks out, often unconsciously, exactly what it lacks. Nietzsche observed something similar in the relationship between what he called the herd and the rare individual, imitation of the noble by those who cannot create at the same level, dressed up afterward as their own original instinct. The insight to take from this: imitation followed by superiority is the most flattering insult disguised as a compliment, because it admits, in the most indirect way possible, that you were worth copying. This is the quietest sabotage of all, and often the most painful, because it doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like loss. A friend who suddenly stops texting as much right after your promotion. A family member who stops asking about your life with the same warmth they once had, right after your wedding or your big success. A group chat that goes noticeably quiet the moment you share good news, only to return to its usual energy the next time someone shares a complaint. Most people explain this away as the other person simply being busy, distracted, or dealing with their own problems. Sometimes that's true. But when the coldness lines up specifically with your wins, it reveals a quieter form of punishment, a withdrawal of warmth used to communicate disapproval without ever having to say a single confrontational word. The motivation here runs deep. Some people genuinely cannot celebrate without feeling diminished by comparison, and rather than confront that uncomfortable feeling directly, they simply retreat from the relationship enough to avoid having to feel it at all. The withdrawal protects them from their own jealousy by removing them from the situation that triggers it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in essence, that we should never let the coldness or judgment of others dictate the value we place on ourselves. Their reaction belongs to them, not to the truth of who we are. Schopenhauer observed that the silence of the envious can speak louder than their words ever could, precisely because what is withheld is so deliberate. The insight worth carrying forward. The coldness you feel after a real success is often the clearest proof available that you have outgrown the terms of comparison someone else built the relationship on. Why do people behave this way? Why does jealousy so rarely show up loud and honest, and almost always arrive disguised, indirect, deniable even to the person doing it? The answer lives at the intersection of ego, fear, and an emotional wound most people never examine. Ego cannot tolerate inferiority, even temporary, even imagined. When someone else's success appears in view, the ego experiences it almost like a physical threat to its own sense of standing. Not because the other person did anything wrong, but simply because comparison is how the ego measures its own worth. Nietzsche's concept of resentment describes exactly this: an inner resentment that cannot express itself directly, because doing so would require admitting weakness. So instead, it expresses itself sideways, through subtle undermining, through backhanded praise, through cold withdrawal. Insecurity plays an equally large role. Most people who sabotage others quietly are not confident villains plotting in the dark. They are frightened people, often unaware of their own fear, reacting to a sense of personal inadequacy that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with an old, unresolved story they carry about their own worth. Jung would say their shadow, the rejected, unacknowledged part of themselves, is doing the talking, while their conscious mind insists it has no idea what you mean. Status and social comparison sit underneath almost every example in this video. Human beings are wired, evolutionarily and psychologically, to measure their position relative to the group. For most of human history, social standing determined survival itself. So when your success shifts the perceived hierarchy, even slightly, it can trigger a defensive reaction in others that feels, to them, disproportionately serious, because some ancient part of the brain genuinely interprets it that way. And underneath all of it sit emotional wounds, childhoods where love felt conditional on achievement, environments where comparison was used as motivation instead of encouragement, relationships where someone learned early that another person's win meant their own loss, people who were taught, directly or indirectly, that worth is scarce will spend their entire adult lives unconsciously trying to protect their share of it, sometimes at your expense. None of this excuses the behavior, but understanding it removes its power over you. A wound explains a wolf. It does not make the wolf safe to ignore. Stay calm. The moment you react with visible anger or hurt, you confirm to the jealous mind that its tactic worked, and you hand them exactly the emotional reaction they were quietly seeking. Don't over-explain yourself. Jealousy is rarely persuaded by evidence, because the issue was never about facts in the first place. Explaining your success in detail to someone who resents it only gives them more material to pick apart. Set boundaries without announcing a war. You don't need a confrontation to protect your peace. Simply reducing how much access someone has to your private wins, your plans, and your vulnerable moments is often enough. Protect your energy like it's a finite resource, because it is. Every minute spent decoding a backhanded comment or replaying an exclusion in your mind is a minute taken from building the life that triggered the jealousy to begin with. Focus on your mission, not on managing other people's feelings about your mission. The Stoics called this living according to nature, pursuing your own excellence, and accepting, without bitterness, that not everyone will applaud it. 100 years ago, jealousy mostly required proximity. You had to actually see your neighbor's new house, hear about your cousin's promotion at a family dinner, witness your friend's happiness in person to feel the sting of comparison. Today, comparison never sleeps. Social media has turned envy into a constant, ambient hum in the background of daily life. Every scroll is a quiet inventory of who is doing better, looking better, achieving more, traveling further. The attention economy rewards the appearance of a perfect life, which means the version of other people's success you're comparing yourself to is rarely even real. And the jealousy it triggers in others toward you is, just as often, aimed at a curated image rather than your full, complicated truth. This has made the silent sabotage tactics in this video more common, not less. A backhanded compliment now arrives as a passive-aggressive comment under a post. Exclusion now happens through being quietly left off a group chat or unfollowed without explanation. Withdrawal now looks like a sudden drop in likes, comments, or replies right after you share something good. Emotional intelligence has never been more valuable than it is right now, precisely Because the modern world has made jealousy easier to hide and harder to confront. Learning to recognize these patterns is no longer a philosophical curiosity. It is a survival skill for protecting your peace. In a culture engineered to keep everyone comparing, scrolling, and quietly measuring themselves against everyone else, here is what most people will never understand about jealousy. It is never really about you. It is about a private war happening inside someone else, a war between who they are and who they wish they had become, a war you simply walked into the middle of by being visible, by trying, by building something real. You now know the 8 quiet ways this war gets waged, the compliments with blades inside them, the silences engineered to exclude, the concern that hides discouragement, the gossip that recruits allies, the information quietly withheld, the comparisons that minimize, the imitation that claims superiority, and the coldness that punishes your success without ever naming it. This knowledge is rare. Most people walk through their entire lives absorbing these wounds without ever understanding where they came from, blaming themselves for relationships that quietly turned cold, for friendships that mysteriously distanced, for support that never quite arrived when it mattered most. You are no longer one of them. Nietzsche believed that what does not destroy us teaches us to stand taller. Marcus Aurelius believed that the obstacle itself becomes the way forward, if you let it. Let this be the truth you carry forward from here. The world will always contain people who cannot bear to watch you rise. Rise anyway. Their silence was never proof of your smallness. It was always proof of how brightly you were already shining.